The summer of 2011 was shaping up to be one of the hottest in Colorado's history, yet for Emily Carter, the heat was nothing more than another test of her endurance. At 28 years old, she had already hiked sections of the Pacific Crest Trail and Appalachian Trail, building a reputation among fellow backpackers as a woman who moved through the wilderness with equal parts grace and grit. She wasn't hiking to escape city life or mend a broken heart, as many assumed. She hiked because she felt more at home among mountain switchbacks and alpine meadows than she ever had in the hum of civilization. That year, she had set her sights on the Colorado Trail, a 486-mile stretch that cut through the heart of the Rockies, weaving between jagged peaks, pristine lakes, and long-forgotten mining towns. Friends thought she was reckless for wanting to attempt it solo, but Emily dismissed their worries with the same calm smile she always carried. "The trail is where I'm safest," she told them. "It's people that scare me, not mountains." At the time, no one knew how chilling those words would become. Her preparations were meticulous. She spent weeks poring over maps, marking potential water sources, resupply points, and side trails in case of emergencies. She was the kind of hiker who double-checked her gear but also carried little luxuries, like the journal she wrote in every night and the small SD card she kept tucked into a waterproof bag, logging her journey with photos and short videos on a compact digital camera. The SD card was her way of preserving proof of the world she moved through: sunsets spilling gold over the San Juan Mountains, the lonely silhouettes of elk wandering across meadows at dusk, and even moments of herself laughing into the lens with wind-tangled hair. Emily believed her story was worth telling, though she wasn't sure if anyone would care to listen. Still, the card filled up quickly with her quiet confessions to the wilderness. By late July, she was 2 weeks into her trek, her tan deepened by the high-altitude sun, her boots already molded to the rhythm of the dirt. Fellow hikers remembered brief encounters with her, passing nods, warm smiles, and sometimes a shared campsite. One man, a retired firefighter named Bill Andrews, recalled chatting with her over instant coffee one morning near Kenosha Pass. "She struck me as fearless," he later told investigators. "But she also seemed, I don't know, like she was carrying something heavy on her mind." Emily didn't share details of her personal life, but friends back home knew she had recently ended a long relationship. Some whispered that hiking alone was her way of processing the break. Others said she had always been a loner, and the trail simply mirrored the solitude she craved. The last confirmed sighting of Emily was on August 2nd, when she passed through a small trail town near Buena Vista. She resupplied at a general store, bought a few extra batteries for her camera, and mentioned to the cashier that she planned to push hard over the next stretch. "See you on the other side," she joked as she slung her pack over her shoulders. But no one saw her again. When she didn't check in with her family as planned, worry set in. By mid-August, a full-scale search and rescue operation was launched. Helicopters scanned ridgelines, ground teams scoured valleys, and volunteers fanned out across sections of the trail she was believed to have taken. They found traces of her, a candy wrapper she favored, a boot print confirmed by her sister, but no sign of Emily herself. It was as if the mountains had swallowed her whole. Weeks stretched into months, and eventually, the search dwindled. The official report listed her as missing, presumed deceased. For her family, the absence was unbearable. Her parents kept her childhood room intact, her younger brother refused to accept she was gone, and her sister often left messages on Emily's old phone long after the number had been disconnected. Every now and then, hikers reported possible sightings, but none held up under scrutiny. Rumors spread like wildfire through online forums dedicated to missing persons. Some believed she had deliberately vanished, staging her disappearance to start a new life. Others speculated she had fallen victim to foul play. A darker corner of the internet even suggested she had stumbled across something she wasn't supposed to, illegal grows hidden deep in the forests, or worse. Theories outpaced facts, and the case faded from headlines. But what no one knew at the time was that Emily had left behind more than footprints. Hidden inside the insole of her left hiking shoe was the SD card she had carried with her since the start. It was wedged so carefully, so deliberately, that even when her belongings were cataloged, no one thought to look there. That card would remain hidden for years, silently preserving the last pieces of her story. For the public, Emily became another tragic name on the long list of missing hikers, a cautionary tale whispered to newcomers on the trail. For her family, she remained an open wound, a mystery with no closure. The wilderness where she vanished was both breathtaking and merciless. The stretch between Buena Vista and the Collegiate Peaks Wilderness was notorious among thru-hikers, not the most dangerous, but demanding enough to test even seasoned backpackers. Thunderstorms rolled in suddenly. The altitude punished the unprepared, and the trail often narrowed to precarious ledges where a single misstep could prove fatal. Searchers combed these areas for weeks, convinced she must have slipped or become disoriented. Yet no body surfaced, no gear, no definitive trace. Each season brought new hikers who walked unknowingly past the same ridgelines, their boots crunching the same dirt where Emily's mystery lingered. As the years passed, Emily's story became folklore. In certain hostels and campsites along the Colorado Trail, hikers spoke of her around fires. Some claimed to feel her presence, an inexplicable chill, a glimpse of a woman's silhouette at dusk. Others treated the tale with reverence, as if Emily had become a spirit of the trail, a reminder of nature's unpredictable power. Her case was often compared to other famous disappearances, adding her name to the haunting catalog of mysteries that defined the American wilderness. For her family, each retelling was salt in a wound. They wanted answers, not legends. What no one suspected, what no one could have imagined, was that somewhere out there, concealed in the sweat-stained fabric of her shoe, a silent witness had been waiting. A witness that saw through the lens of Emily's camera. A witness that had recorded not only her joys and struggles on the trail, but also the chilling moments leading up to whatever fate had befallen her. For nearly a decade, that SD card remained hidden, untouched by weather, rodents, or time itself. And when it was finally discovered, years later, the truth it contained would unravel everything people thought they knew about Emily's disappearance. It would reveal a story far darker, far stranger, and far more terrifying than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The summer of 2019 brought an unusually dry season to Colorado, and with it, a group of trail maintenance volunteers working deep in the Collegiate Peaks Wilderness. They weren't searching for lost hikers. Their mission was simple: to clear fallen trees, repair eroded switchbacks, and repaint faded trail markers. The wilderness had a way of revealing remnants of the past during such projects. Rusted tin cans from miners who'd long since vanished, tattered tarps from long-abandoned camps, sometimes even scraps of clothing that time had nearly reclaimed. On the morning of July 14th, two volunteers, a retired teacher named Carol Jensen and her nephew, a college student named Ryan, were assigned to clear a section of overgrown trail near a steep ravine. That was when Carol noticed something unusual lodged between roots at the edge of a collapsed slope. At first, she thought it was just another hiker's discarded boot, sun-bleached and chewed by rodents. But as she nudged it loose with her trekking pole, she realized it was a women's hiking shoe, scuffed and torn but remarkably intact. When they pulled the shoe free from the soil, Ryan remarked that it looked almost fossilized, stiffened by years of exposure. They debated whether it was worth reporting, but Carol, who had lived in Colorado long enough to remember the case of the missing thru-hiker, felt a twinge of unease. She slipped the shoe into a bag, making a mental note to contact the sheriff's office once they returned to town. Neither of them could have known in that moment that the discovery they carried so casually in their pack was the key to unlocking one of Colorado's most haunting mysteries. The shoe sat for nearly a week in the evidence room of the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office before anyone looked closely at it. When Deputy Mark Hollister finally examined it, he noticed something odd. The insole had been carefully cut and re-glued, leaving a faint seam. Hollister pried it apart and found a small waterproof bag tucked inside. The plastic had yellowed with age, but its contents were unmistakable: a slim SD card, no larger than a fingernail, wrapped with meticulous care. Hollister stared at it for a long time before logging it into evidence. Missing persons cases rarely resurfaced with new evidence after so many years, and he wondered if this could finally explain what had happened to Emily Carter. The card was sent to the state crime lab for analysis, where technicians worked cautiously to preserve the data. Against all odds, the files were intact. Dozens of folders appeared, filled with photographs and video clips, each time-stamped between July and early August of 2011. At first, the files seemed like exactly what one would expect. Breathtaking shots of alpine vistas, videos of Emily grinning into the camera while narrating her progress, snippets of wildlife, rushing creeks, and the quiet beauty of campfires under a canopy of stars. Investigators who watched the footage described an almost intimate connection with her, as if she were still alive and speaking directly to them across the span of 8 years. But as they progressed deeper into the files, the tone began to shift. The videos became shorter, shakier, and less frequent. Emily's once bright smile gave way to expressions of unease, her commentary more clipped, her laughter absent. By the last few entries, her voice trembled, her eyes darted toward sounds off camera, and she whispered things that made the hair stand on the back of every investigator's neck. When the sheriff's office released news of the discovery, it spread like wildfire. Local papers ran headlines about the lost SD card, and national outlets quickly picked up the story. Social media exploded with speculation, hashtags like #EmilyCarterEstCard trending within days. For Emily's family, the phone calls started almost immediately. Her sister, Anna, broke down when she learned about the card's existence, both relieved that something of her sister's had been found and terrified about what it might contain. For years, we begged for answers, she told reporters. Now we're scared of what those answers might be. Emily's parents, aged and weary from the long absence, were shielded from the card's contents until investigators could determine whether it revealed her fate or merely deepened the mystery. The sheriff's office decided to release only a fraction of the recovered files to the public, withholding the more disturbing footage. The first batch showed Emily hiking along ridges, her voice light as she described the miles she had covered. She filmed herself cooking simple meals, filtering water from streams, and journaling by lantern light. In one particularly poignant clip, she stared at the lens for a long moment before saying, "If anyone ever finds this, just know, I was happy out here. Happier than I've ever been." That clip went viral almost instantly, embraced by outdoor enthusiasts as a testament to the beauty and risk of wilderness. The decision to reopen Emily Carter's case was not made adventures. But for those who had seen the unreleased footage, the viral clip was only the calm before the storm. Behind closed doors, investigators reviewed the final entries. In one of the last videos, dated August 3rd, Emily whispered to the camera, her voice shaking. "I don't think I'm alone out here," she said. "I've seen someone or something. At first, I thought it was just another hiker, but they're not following the trail. They're watching." The footage cut off abruptly, leaving investigators to wonder if she had been stalked. Another clip, filmed 2 days later, showed her huddled inside her tent during a thunderstorm, flinching at noises outside. "If this is the last thing I record," she whispered, "please tell my family I love them." Her eyes were wide, her face pale with fear. That was the final video. After that, the card contained nothing but corrupted files, unreadable fragments of data. The revelation sent shockwaves through the hiking community. Forums lit up with heated debates. Had Emily been murdered? Had she stumbled into the path of a stranger who meant her harm? Or was her fear the product of exhaustion, isolation, and altitude sickness? Experienced backpackers pointed out that paranoia was not uncommon in long-distance hiking, especially when alone for weeks at a time. But others were unconvinced. "She knew the wilderness," one commenter wrote. "She wasn't the type to spook easily. If she was scared, there was a reason." Theories spiraled out of control. Some insisted she had encountered a drifter or fugitive hiding out in the mountains. Others suggested a serial predator who targeted remote trails. A fringe group latched onto the idea that she had seen something supernatural, citing legends of the Rockies' haunted past, spirits of miners, lost souls of pioneers, even cryptid sightings whispered by locals. The sheriff's office tried to temper the speculation, but the mystery was out of their hands. Emily's story had transcended the realm of missing persons. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a modern ghost story with chilling evidence to back it up. For Emily's family, the discovery was both a blessing and a torment. Her brother, Michael, refused to watch the footage at first, saying he couldn't bear to see her frightened. Her sister Anna, however, forced herself to sit through every second, desperate for closure. She described the experience as like watching her disappear in real time. Though the SD card answered some questions, it raised far more. Where had she gone after that last video? Why was her shoe found near a ravine, but not the rest of her gear? And who, or what, had she been afraid of in those final days? The investigation was formally reopened, though authorities admitted their chances of solving the case after so many years were slim. Still, the SD card gave them a timeline they hadn't had before, and perhaps, if they were lucky, it might lead to Emily's remains, or her killer. In the meantime, the public clung to the fragments of her story, piecing together theories from every frame of footage. Some people even began retracing her route, determined to uncover the truth themselves. For them, Emily's mystery wasn't just a tragedy, it was an invitation into the unknown, a puzzle that begged to be solved. And somewhere in the shadows of the Rockies, amid the jagged cliffs and silent forests, the truth of Emily Carter's disappearance still waited, buried, hidden, and far lightly. In August 2019, Sheriff Daniel Reeves stood before a room full of reporters, his jaw tight, his voice steady as he confirmed what everyone had been whispering. New evidence has come to light in the disappearance of Emily Carter. We are treating this as an active investigation. Behind him, a table displayed Emily's photograph, the same image that had graced countless missing posters 8 years earlier, a smiling young woman with sunburned cheeks and eyes alight with determination. The photograph had become iconic, a symbol of both loss and resilience, and now it resurfaced in the headlines once again. For Reeves, who had overseen the original search effort in 2011, the case carried a personal weight. "We searched those mountains for weeks," he told his deputies privately. "If there's something we missed, I need to know what." The first step was to analyze the SD card in detail. Digital forensic specialists enhanced the audio of Emily's final videos, isolating background noises her frightened whispers had nearly drowned out. In one clip, during the thunderstorm, faint crunching footsteps could be heard outside her tent. At first, investigators assumed it was an animal, perhaps a deer or elk. But audio technicians noted the rhythm was deliberate, almost human-like. Another file, previously dismissed as corrupted, was partially restored to reveal just a few seconds of footage, a dark silhouette at the edge of her campfire's glow, motionless, watching. The frame was grainy, but the shape was unmistakably humanoid. Investigators debated whether it was evidence of a stalker or simply a digital artifact caused by the card's deterioration. Still, the possibility could not be ignored. With this new context, search teams returned to the area near where the shoe had been found. The ravine was treacherous, a steep drop of shale and loose soil that had likely shifted during heavy rains and snowmelt over the years. Rangers believed her shoe may have been dislodged by erosion and carried downslope. But if her shoe had ended up there, why hadn't her pack, tent, or bones been found nearby? Forensic anthropologists joined the search, scouring the slopes with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. A few scraps of nylon, consistent with backpack material, were recovered half-buried in soil, but no definitive link to Emily could be proven. Each discovery raised more questions than answers. Meanwhile, detectives began retracing Emily's final days through eyewitness accounts. They interviewed hikers who had been on the trail in early August 2011. Most remembered little after so many years, but a few encounters stood out. A pair of college students recalled passing a woman they later identified as Emily near Twin Lakes. She seemed on edge, one of them said, kept looking over her shoulder. "I thought maybe she'd seen a bear." Another hiker, a man named John Hayes, described meeting her briefly on August 1st. She asked if I'd seen anyone camping off-trail, he recalled. said she thought someone was shadowing her. I told her it was probably nothing, but she didn't look convinced. Investigators considered Hayes credible. He had no criminal record, and his story matched the timeline established by the SD card. Still, the idea of someone stalking Emily became central to the reopened case. Theories about who that stalker might have been proliferated. Detectives dug into reports of suspicious activity in the region around 2011. One name surfaced repeatedly, a drifter known only as Red, a man who had been spotted camping illegally near trailheads during that summer. Witnesses described him as gaunt, with unkempt hair and a tendency to mutter to himself. Rangers had run him off several times, but he always returned, slipping deeper into the backcountry. Though he had no known history of violence, the idea that Emily might have crossed paths with him seemed plausible. The problem was that Red had vanished as suddenly as he appeared, and despite efforts to track him down years later, no trace of him remained. As investigators pursued leads, Emily's family was caught in a whirlwind of renewed media attention. News crews camped outside their modest home in Denver, desperate for quotes, sound bites, or any glimpse of the grieving relatives. Emily's mother, Margaret, avoided the spotlight, retreating into silence, while her father gave careful, restrained statements pleading for privacy. Anna, however, became the family's voice. She sat for interviews, her tone steady, but her eyes glistening. "We've waited 8 years for answers," she told one national anchor. "We'll wait 8 more if we have to. But we deserve to know the truth." Her words resonated with viewers, and soon she became a reluctant figurehead for families of the missing, receiving letters from strangers who saw in her their own unresolved losses. Online, the case took on a life of its own. Amateur sleuths pored over the SD card footage frame by frame, claiming to see hidden figures in the treeline or strange symbols carved into rocks behind Emily. Some insisted she had stumbled onto a drug operation, while others theorized she'd discovered evidence of illegal logging or mining. A vocal minority argued that the videos proved something supernatural, that Emily had been lured away by forces beyond comprehension. These theories, while sensational, kept her story alive, generating documentaries, podcasts, and endless speculation. Law enforcement dismissed most of it as noise, but occasionally a tip from the online community aligned with their own findings, forcing them to reconsider whether public obsession might actually help. One such tip led to a startling discovery. A hiker reviewing old GPS logs realized that in late July 2011, he had recorded an unusual waypoint near the Collegiate Peaks. Curious, he revisited the location in 2019 and found a weathered scrap of fabric snagged on a tree branch, bright blue nylon. He turned it over to authorities, who compared it to Emily's known gear. Her pack, according to her family, had been cobalt blue. Forensic testing confirmed the fabric bore traces of DNA matching Emily's profile. The find reignited hope, but it also deepened the mystery. The waypoint was nearly 5 miles from where her shoe had been found, suggesting she had traveled, or been moved, considerable distance after her final video. Detectives began to suspect foul play more strongly. They theorized that Emily had been pursued, possibly abducted, and her belongings scattered over time by both nature and human interference. Yet no clear suspect emerged. Interviews with locals unearthed a few unsettling stories. Hunters who claimed to hear screams in the woods around that time, hikers who reported seeing makeshift camps hidden far from the trail, and even one woman who swore she encountered a man dragging a heavy pack that looked too full, too heavy for just camping gear. But memories faded, details blurred, and without concrete evidence, the case teetered between possibility and speculation. Amid the investigation, one question haunted Sheriff Reeves. Why had Emily hidden the SD card in her shoe? She clearly anticipated something might happen. Her decision to conceal it suggested she feared losing it. Investigators debated whether she suspected she was in danger and wanted to ensure the card would survive even if she didn't. That act, small yet deliberate, transformed her from a passive victim into an active participant in her own story. It was as though she had left behind a breadcrumb, hoping someday someone would piece it together. Reeves often wondered if she had known her fate and, in those final hours, chosen to preserve her truth rather than run. The reopened case stretched into months, then years. By 2021, despite renewed searches, interviews, and forensic analysis, no body had been found. The SD card remained the central piece of evidence, both tantalizing and frustrating. Its images of mountains and rivers captured the timeless beauty of Colorado, but its final haunting clips painted a darker picture, one that refused to resolve into certainty. For investigators, the case became a paradox. The closer they looked, the less clear the truth seemed. For Emily's family, it was agony prolonged, hope and despair braided together in an endless cycle. Still, the wilderness kept its secrets. The Collegiate Peaks loomed as they always had, indifferent to human tragedy, their jagged summits bathed in sunrise and storm. Each year, hikers passed through, some aware of Emily's story, others oblivious, their boots striking the same dirt where she once walked. And somewhere out there, perhaps buried beneath roots, perhaps concealed in shadows, lay the final piece of the puzzle, the one that would transform her story from mystery into truth. Until then, the SD card was both a gift and a curse, a fragile link to Emily's last days, and a reminder of the darkness that lingered in the wild. By the winter of 2021, the case of Emily Carter had grown into something far larger than the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office could manage alone. National outlets still ran occasional updates, but it was the independent investigators, the podcasters, YouTubers, documentary filmmakers, and online sleuths who kept her story alive. They called themselves Trail Watchers, a loose collective of hikers, journalists, and armchair detectives who treated Emily's disappearance as both a tragedy and a puzzle. Their forums overflowed with speculation, diagrams of her last known locations, analyses of her SD card videos frame by frame. What had started as curiosity had hardened into obsession. Some were convinced they could solve what law enforcement could not. Others simply wanted to honor Emily by refusing to let her fade into the long list of forgotten missing hikers. One of the most prominent voices was Laura Mitchell, a Denver-based investigative journalist who had covered wilderness disappearances for years. Laura had first written about Emily in 2012, interviewing her family when the wound was still fresh. At the time, she remembered Margaret Carter's hollow stare, Anna's trembling voice, and the way Michael clenched his fists when asked about the search. 8 years later, when the SD card surfaced, Laura returned to the case with renewed urgency. Unlike many sensationalist outlets, she sought depth rather than spectacle. She spent months poring through search and rescue reports, interviewing retired deputies, and speaking with hikers who remembered seeing Emily on the trail. In her articles, she painted Emily not as a mystery to be consumed, but as a vibrant young woman whose voice still echoed through her recordings. Emily Carter is not a ghost story, Laura wrote. She is a sister, a daughter, a hiker who laughed at storms and found joy in solitude. To reduce her to legend is to betray her. Yet even Laura could not ignore the darker implications of the SD card footage. She arranged private screenings with audio specialists, hoping to clarify the shadowy silhouette seen in one of Emily's final clips. One expert swore it was human. Another claimed it was nothing more than a distortion caused by moisture damage. A third suggested it might be a figure crouching, though the shape was too unclear to prove. Each interpretation spawned new theories, none definitive. Still, Laura noticed something most others had missed. In the background of one video, just before Emily whispered about being watched, there was a faint glimmer, like light reflecting off glass. Laura wondered if it could have been binoculars, or perhaps the lens of another camera. The thought chilled her. If Emily had been documenting her journey, was someone else documenting hers? The sheriff's office dismissed the idea of a second cameraman as speculation, but Lara's reporting sparked widespread debate. Amateur analysts overlaid maps of potential sightlines along the trail, debating whether a person could have tracked Emily unnoticed. The Collegiate Peaks offered plenty of vantage points for someone skilled in moving quietly through rugged terrain. Hunters and survivalists weighed in, noting that a determined individual could shadow a hiker for days without being detected. Others argued it was paranoia. Emily herself might have been disoriented, her exhaustion warping her perception. The divide between stalker theory and psychological theory widened, and Emily's story became a battleground between rationalists and those who believed something sinister had truly unfolded. Meanwhile, new evidence trickled in, though never enough to break the case open. In early 2022, a team of volunteer searchers uncovered a rusted cooking pot near a remote drainage about 6 miles from where the shoe had been found. It was pitted with rust, but the brand matched the model Emily was known to carry. Nearby, they found a fragment of tarp fabric and a bent tent stake. Forensic testing suggested weathering consistent with 8 to 10 years of exposure. Though investigators couldn't conclusively tie the items to Emily, the location aligned eerily with the direction her final videos suggested she had been traveling. If the gear was hers, it meant she had moved or been moved considerably farther than search teams had initially believed. But here lay the troubling part. If Emily had indeed continued along that drainage, her odds of survival should have increased. There were water sources nearby, sheltered campsites, and clear routes back to the trail. So, why hadn't she made it out? Rangers speculated she may have been injured, perhaps a fall, perhaps hypothermia if a storm caught her unprepared. Yet the SD card showed her lucid and cautious until the end. Something about the scattered gear, the shoe, and the missing remains didn't add up. Sheriff Reeves, frustrated by dead ends, admitted privately that he sometimes wondered if the case had crossed into the inexplicable. It's like chasing smoke, he told a colleague. Every clue dissolves as soon as you grab it. Public fascination grew darker with each development. Documentaries dramatized Emily's last days, reenacting her videos with actresses whispering into cameras under flickering lantern light. Podcasts dissected her every word, speculating whether her voice betrayed signs of delirium or fear. Some creators went further, exploiting the tragedy with titles like The Haunted Hiker of Colorado. These sensationalized retellings infuriated Emily's family, who begged the public to remember her as more than a spooky tale. She was real, Anna wrote in an open letter. She had a laugh that could fill a room. She loved bad coffee and old paperbacks. She wasn't a character. She was my sister. Her plea resonated with many, but it couldn't stop the tide of folklore that had already risen around Emily's name. What unsettled everyone most were the unanswered questions about the SD card itself. Why had it remained hidden for so long? Why had no one found it during the initial search, despite cataloging her belongings? Investigators revisited the evidence logs from 2011 and discovered discrepancies. Several items from Emily's pack were unaccounted for, including her camera. Had someone found the camera years earlier and removed the card, hiding it in her shoe? Or had Emily herself made the decision to conceal it, anticipating that only her shoes might survive exposure? Theories multiplied, each one more unnerving than the last. Among the amateur sleuths, a faction emerged that believed Emily's disappearance was part of a larger pattern. They linked her case to other missing hikers across the Rockies, suggesting an unknown predator was targeting lone backpackers. Some pointed to unsolved disappearances stretching back decades, insisting Emily's story was not isolated but part of a hidden chain. Law enforcement, cautious not to inflame panic, dismissed these connections, citing lack of evidence. Yet the idea stuck. On forums and message boards, people began mapping vanishing zones, regions where hikers seemed to disappear at disproportionate rates. Emily's case became the centerpiece of these theories, the most tangible example of something dark lurking in the wilderness. For Emily's family, the constant speculation was exhausting. Michael grew bitter, lashing out at reporters who lingered outside their home. Margaret withdrew further, rarely leaving the house. Anna, however, pressed on. She partnered with Laura Mitchell, providing access to Emily's journals, emails, and personal notes. She hoped that by showing the world who Emily was, people might focus less on the mystery and more on the woman. Lara's subsequent feature, titled The Voice on the Trail, became a widely shared piece of long-form journalism. It humanized Emily in a way few others had managed, weaving her words with the haunting footage from the SD card. The article ended with a line that stayed with readers. Perhaps Emily's greatest act of courage was not walking alone into the wilderness, but leaving behind a record so that we would know she was here. Still, the questions refused to die. In late 2022, another volunteer search group returned to the Collegiate Peaks armed with drones, thermal cameras, and cadaver dogs. For weeks they scoured the ridges and drainages, but once again, nothing conclusive emerged. The wilderness seemed determined to keep its secrets. Every so often, the searchers would pause, listening to the wind in the trees, the eerie stillness of valleys where even birdsong seemed absent. More than one volunteer admitted privately to feeling watched, as though the forest itself held memory of what had transpired. Rational minds chalked it up to nerves, but those who had seen Emily's final footage knew better. The sensation echoed her whispered fear. "I don't think I'm alone out here." By early 2023, the case stood at an impasse. Investigators had evidence, but no resolution, theories, but no closure. The SD card, though invaluable, was both a beacon and a curse. It illuminated Emily's last days, but stopped short of revealing her fate. And so, her story lingered in limbo, suspended between tragedy and legend. For her family, it was unbearable. For the public, it was irresistible. And for the wilderness that had swallowed her, it was nothing at all, just another life folded into its endless silence. By the spring of 2023, Emily Carter's story had shifted from a regional cold case into a national fixation. The SD card discovery had breathed new life into a mystery that many had assumed would never be solved, and the lingering gaps in the narrative only fed the obsession. Networks aired primetime specials, outdoor magazines debated the ethics of solo hiking, and streaming platforms raced to secure rights for documentaries. Yet while the public consumed Emily's story as content, investigators in Colorado were drowning in tips, theories, and pressure. Sheriff Reeves admitted privately that he had never experienced anything like it. "It's like trying to sift through a landslide with a spoon," he told his deputies. "Everyone thinks they know what happened to Emily Carter. But the mountain doesn't give a damn about our theories." The sheriff's office formed a specialized task force, combining search and rescue veterans, digital analysts, and cold case detectives. Their mission was to retrace Emily's final steps as precisely as possible. Using her SD card timestamps, they created a day-by-day timeline of her journey. They cross-referenced her videos with GPS coordinates from known trail sections, weather data, and interviews with hikers who had seen her. The picture that emerged was clearer than before, but no less chilling. Emily had been moving steadily, covering respectable mileage each day. She appeared calm and organized until the last 48 hours, when her recordings revealed mounting fear. Then, abruptly, silence. It was as though she had walked into a void. To close that void, the task force launched an intensive search operation in July 2023. For weeks, teams combed the Collegiate Peaks, deploying drones equipped with LiDAR to scan ravines, caves, and dense forests. Cadaver dogs were brought in, their handlers carefully working grids across the rugged terrain. The dogs alerted at several locations, but none yielded remains. Only animal bones, weathered gear, and false leads. One site, however, produced a discovery that unsettled everyone: a crude stone fire ring deep in the drainage where Emily's pack material had been found. Inside the ring were charred fragments of fabric, partially fused with melted plastic. Forensic tests later confirmed the fabric matched synthetic materials used in lightweight hiking gear. Whether the fire was Emily's attempt to burn trash, or someone else's attempt to destroy evidence, no one could say. That same summer, an independent search team led by survivalist and former ranger David Callahan claimed to find something even more startling. Callahan's team had been scouring a ridge about 8 miles from the original shoe site when they stumbled across a weathered notebook, its pages fused by water damage, but still legible in places. The handwriting matched samples from Emily's journals provided by her family. Most entries were mundane: mile markers, notes on water sources, sketches of birds and flowers. But the final page contained a scrawled message that made Callahan's blood run cold. "He's following me. I hear him at night. If this is found, I didn't imagine it." The notebook was turned over to authorities, who authenticated it as Emily's. Its existence fueled national headlines. Hiker's chilling final message found in Rockies. For the public, it was confirmation that Emily's fear had been real, not a product of exhaustion or isolation. But for investigators, it raised more questions. Who was he? If Emily truly believed she was being followed, why hadn't she abandoned the trail and sought help at the nearest town? Why were her belongings scattered across such a wide area? Some detectives argued the notebook suggested human foul play. Others maintained that paranoia could have driven Emily to misinterpret natural sounds as pursuit. Sheriff Reeves was caught between these camps, unwilling to rule anything out but wary of stoking panic about an unknown predator in the mountains. The discovery of the notebook also intensified interest from amateur sleuths. Online forums erupted, some users claiming the handwriting looked too neat to have been scrawled under duress, others insisting the message was a fabrication planted to sensationalize the case. Conspiracy theories multiplied. Some claimed law enforcement knew more than they were admitting. Others argued Emily had uncovered something illegal, an off-grid encampment, perhaps, or an illicit operation hidden deep in the Rockies. Fringe groups suggested she had been targeted deliberately for documenting too much with her camera. Each theory had its adherents, and each only deepened the mythos of Emily Carter. Amid the chaos, Emily's family endured another wave of media intrusion. Reporters camped outside their home again, demanding reactions to the notebook. Anna, weary but unrelenting, gave a statement. Every clue brings us closer to understanding what Emily went through. But what we want, what we've always wanted, is the truth. My sister didn't vanish into thin air. Someone or something knows what happened. Her words resonated with viewers, casting the case not as folklore but as an ongoing injustice. Donations poured in to support continued searches, funding equipment, and volunteer operations. Yet as searches expanded, unsettling patterns emerged. Several volunteers reported odd encounters in the wilderness, a lone figure glimpsed at a distance, always vanishing when approached. Strange stone cairns built in places where no one had reason to mark the trail. Faint, whistling sounds at night, echoing through valleys. Some dismissed these as the nerves of overworked searchers, but others whispered that Emily's stalker, or whatever had frightened her, still lingered in those mountains. Callahan himself admitted, during a podcast interview, that he sometimes felt a pair of eyes on him while searching. I've been in the backcountry all my life, he said. I know the difference between paranoia and presence. And out there, there's presence. Law enforcement, reluctant to fuel superstition, ignored such claims. But the Colorado Trail community could not. By the fall of 2023, rumors of a watcher of the Collegiate Peaks circulated among hikers. Some swore they'd seen him, a tall, gaunt figure slipping silently through trees, always just out of reach. Whether myth or reality, the legend took hold, blending with Emily's story until the two were inseparable. For those who believed in the Watcher, Emily had been his victim. For skeptics, it was nothing more than the imagination of frightened hikers compounded by the weight of her tragic disappearance. What complicated matters further was the condition of the SD card itself. Forensic analysts discovered metadata suggesting some files had been accessed after August 2011, years before the card's official discovery. The revelation, leaked by an anonymous source, caused a firestorm. If true, it meant someone had found the card earlier, copied or tampered with its files, then concealed it in Emily's shoe before abandoning it. Law enforcement neither confirmed nor denied the leak, but the possibility was chilling. Who had handled the card in those missing years? And why had they chosen to hide it rather than turn it in? Journalist Laura Mitchell pursued this lead relentlessly. She filed public records requests, pressed deputies for answers, and even tracked down former volunteers from the 2011 search. One former volunteer, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed he remembered finding a camera near the drainage, but being told by a superior that it was irrelevant to the case. Laura suspected a cover-up, whether intentional or due to bureaucratic incompetence. She couldn't tell. Her reporting suggested that the original investigation may have mishandled evidence, delaying the truth by nearly a decade. The sheriff's office denied wrongdoing, but cracks in their credibility widened. By the end of 2023, the case had reached a fever pitch. Searchers continued to comb the mountains. Journalists dug into old records. Online sleuths dissected every shred of evidence. Yet the wilderness remained silent, offering only fragments: a shoe, a scrap of tarp, a notebook, a card of haunting videos. Emily Carter's fate remained elusive, tantalizingly close yet impossibly distant. Her story had become more than a disappearance. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's fear of the unknown, the fragility of memory, and the vast, indifferent power of nature. And still, in the quietest hours of night, those who searched for her swore the same thing, that the mountains were watching. Winter gripped the Rockies with a merciless hand, snow swallowing the trails where Emily Carter once walked. Search efforts slowed, but the investigation did not. Instead, it shifted from boots on the ground to analysis in labs, interviews in offices, and theories that stretched the boundaries of plausibility. By January of 2024, the case file on Emily had grown to thousands of pages, a labyrinth of statements, maps, digital records, and forensic reports. Yet every new discovery seemed only to deepen the shadows instead of illuminating them. What had started as a tragic missing persons case was now twisting into something stranger, something that felt less like an investigation and more like a reckoning. The SD card remained at the center of that reckoning. Forensic specialists pored over its contents again and again, examining metadata, running recovery software, and testing the memory structure for anomalies. What they found unsettled even the most hardened analysts. Beyond Emily's final videos, fragments of corrupted files appeared, broken images, partial clips, and garbled audio. One image, heavily distorted, seemed to show the silhouette of a man standing among trees at night, though whether it was compression artifacts or an actual figure remained debated. Another file contained only a few seconds of sound, a sharp intake of breath, a low hum, and then silence. Analysts could not determine whether these fragments had been created by Emily, overwritten by accident, or inserted later. But the very fact they existed fueled theories that the SD card had passed through unknown hands before being hidden. The more investigators dug into the possibility of human involvement, the murkier the trail became. Old search and rescue logs revealed inconsistencies, missing sign-in sheets, volunteers whose names could not be verified, equipment lists that didn't match what was distributed. Sheriff Reeves, frustrated by the growing suspicion of mishandling, authorized a review of every individual who had participated in the 2011 search. Out of dozens, 2 names stood out. Both belonged to men with minor criminal histories: trespassing, theft, a weapons charge. One had since left Colorado altogether. The other still lived in Buena Vista. Detectives interviewed him, but he denied any involvement, insisting he barely remembered the search at all. "It was just a couple days of walking in the woods," he said. "We didn't find anything." Still, investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that someone had stumbled across Emily's belongings years earlier and deliberately kept them hidden. Meanwhile, journalist Laura Mitchell continued her own pursuit. She had grown obsessed with Emily, not only as a subject, but as a symbol of how stories could be buried by negligence and resurrected by persistence. In February 2024, she published an exposé alleging that the sheriff's office had downplayed early evidence of foul play to avoid panic during tourist season. The article drew national attention, earning both praise and condemnation. Law enforcement dismissed it as speculative, but Laura received an anonymous email days later containing coordinates deep within the Collegiate Peaks. The message was brief. "If you want the truth, go here. Bring light." Against the advice of her editor, Laura hiked to the location with a small film crew. What they found was unnerving. A makeshift lean-to shelter, half-collapsed under snow, containing the skeletal remains of small animals arranged in a circle. In the center sat a rusted camping lantern, its glass shattered. Whether it was the work of a survivalist, a prankster, or something more sinister, Lara couldn't determine. But the imagery was undeniable. It echoed the sense of being watched that Emily had described in her final notes. When photos of the site leaked online, speculation erupted again. Some claimed it was a ritual site, evidence of cult activity in the mountains. Others insisted it was merely an abandoned bushcraft shelter left to decay. But what chilled many was the thought that Emily herself might have stumbled upon something similar, something that convinced her she wasn't alone out there. If she had, and if she documented it, perhaps that explained the corrupted files on her SD card. The possibility that Emily had uncovered traces of someone living, or hiding, in those mountains was now a theory investigators could not dismiss. Searchers returned to the field in March, despite the lingering snow. This time, they focused not only on finding Emily's remains, but on uncovering signs of habitation, camps, caches, structures. Over several weeks, they documented multiple sites: an old mining shack with evidence of recent use, a cave containing empty food tins and cigarette butts, and a grove where someone had carved symbols into tree bark. None of it could be tied directly to Emily, but together it suggested that others had been living in the backcountry, unseen and unacknowledged, even as hundreds searched for her. At the same time, the Colorado Trail community began to fracture under the weight of fear. For decades, the trail had been a place of camaraderie and resilience, but now whispers of the Watcher kept some hikers away entirely. Outfitters reported cancellations. Trail angels, the volunteers who supported hikers with food and shelter, spoke of unease. And for those who did hike, every snapped twig, every flicker of movement at the edge of vision, carried a new weight. It was as though Emily's story had cursed the trail, replacing its spirit of adventure with a cloud of dread. Emily's family, enduring another year without closure, struggled to reconcile the new discoveries with their memories of her. Her mother refused to believe Emily had been murdered, clinging to the hope she had simply lost her way and succumbed to nature. Anna, however, grew convinced that foul play was undeniable. She became more vocal, calling press conferences and demanding the FBI take over the case. If Emily had been a man, or if she hadn't been dismissed as just another careless hiker, we would have answers by now, she declared. Her words struck a chord with many who saw the case as emblematic of a larger issue: how society often trivialized missing women in wilderness settings, chalking them up to accidents rather than potential crimes. By late spring, the FBI did quietly begin assisting in the background, offering technical expertise and behavioral analysis. One profiler suggested that if Emily truly had a pursuer, he was likely someone familiar with the terrain, perhaps even embedded within the hiking community. Predators go where prey is plentiful, he explained. The trail system provides a constant flow of isolated individuals who are often exhausted, distracted, and far from help. If someone wanted to stalk, it would be the perfect environment. The chilling implication that Emily may not have been the only target sparked fresh concern. Old missing persons reports from the region were re-examined. Patterns began to emerge, though tenuous: hikers who vanished without trace, accidents that seemed inconsistent with their experience levels, reports of strange encounters that had never been followed up. Yet for all the growing evidence and speculation, one truth remained: Emily herself had not been found. The mountains still held her, whether in a shallow grave, beneath a snowdrift, or scattered across ravines. Each failed search chipped away at hope, but also deepened the mystery. People began to say that Emily had become part of the wilderness itself, her presence lingering in wind and shadow, her story etched into the peaks. Hikers left cairns in her memory, stacking stones at trailheads. Social media spread photos of boots tied to branches in her honor. She was gone, yet she was everywhere. And beneath that haunting legacy, an unspoken fear gnawed at everyone involved. If Emily's SD card was hidden in her own shoe, then someone alive, had placed it there. Which meant her disappearance wasn't just a story of solitude and wilderness. It was a story of intrusion. A story of another presence on that trail. a story that was not yet finished. By summer of 2024, the case of Emily Carter no longer belonged to Colorado alone. It had become a national fixation, a mystery dissected on true crime podcasts, debated in forums, and recreated in late-night documentaries. Yet behind the sensationalism, the investigators, both official and unofficial, were drowning in contradictions. Each new thread seemed to unravel into more questions than answers, and the wilderness that had once been celebrated as a place of healing now loomed as a stage for something darker. The FBI's forensic analysis of the SD card delivered its most unsettling result in June. Using advanced recovery tools, they managed to piece together a partially deleted video clip. The footage was only 28 seconds long, but it shattered any lingering belief that Emily's disappearance had been an accident. In the recovered sequence, Emily's face appeared illuminated by the glow of her headlamp. Her eyes were wide, darting into the darkness beyond the frame. She whispered something almost inaudible. "He's still there." Then the camera jerked, as though she had heard movement. For a split second, a shape passed behind her, tall and indistinct, the beam of the headlamp catching only a fragment, the pale curve of a face, the glint of metal. The video cut out abruptly after a loud thud, leaving silence. The video leaked within days. Though law enforcement tried to suppress its spread, it exploded online. Millions viewed the clip, slowing it down, analyzing the blurred frame, arguing whether the figure was human or an illusion. Some claimed to see a man with a knife. Others insisted it was a trick of light, a branch or a reflection. But the overwhelming consensus was chilling. Emily had not been alone in her final moments. The mountains had held not just her, but someone else. This revelation reignited debate over the abandoned shelters and carved trees discovered earlier in the year. Were they part of a network of hidden dwellings, a community of recluses living off the grid? Or did they belong to a single predator, a shadow who had roamed the trails undetected for years? Old-timers in Buena Vista recalled rumors from decades past of a phantom trapper, a man who avoided civilization, stealing supplies and vanishing into the peaks. Some laughed it off as folklore, but now those stories resurfaced with grim weight. Had Emily stumbled across such a figure? Journalist Laura Mitchell leaned into these questions, publishing a series of articles that painted Emily's case as the tip of a larger iceberg. She revealed that at least 7 other hikers had gone missing in Colorado's backcountry in the last 15 years under suspicious circumstances. Their cases, once dismissed as accidents, bore striking similarities: missing gear, abandoned campsites, vague signs of struggle. None had been solved. In one particularly haunting case, a hiker's boots had been found neatly placed beside a stream, but the man himself was never recovered. Laura suggested that Emily may have captured evidence of the same predator who had stalked others before her. The possibility of a serial predator in the wilderness divided experts. Behavioral profilers acknowledged it was plausible, but difficult to prove without bodies. Survival specialists argued that the Rockies could easily hide someone for decades: dense forests, abandoned mining tunnels, vast stretches of land seldom patrolled. One former ranger even speculated that such a person could live undetected by scavenging from hikers, raiding cabins, and hunting small game. "If someone doesn't want to be found up there," he said, "they won't be. Unless you trip over their camp by accident." Emily's family watched these developments with horror. Anna, Emily's sister, grew increasingly vocal, appearing on news programs and demanding accountability. She accused local authorities of failing to protect hikers, of ignoring early signs, and of treating Emily's case as expendable until the SD card forced their hand. Her grief hardened into activism. She organized vigils, rallies, and fundraisers to demand greater safety measures on long-distance trails. Yet with every appearance, she also reminded the public that her sister was still missing. "Emily isn't a headline," she told one crowd. "She's a daughter, a sister, a friend. And she deserves to come home." Amid the media storm, law enforcement pursued leads quietly. In July, they raided a remote cabin outside Leadville after a tip suggested a reclusive man had once lived there who hated hikers. The cabin was long abandoned, filled with decaying furniture and rusted traps, but on one wall investigators found a map of the Colorado Trail marked with pins. Tests on the items yielded no usable DNA, no direct tie to Emily. Still, the discovery fueled fears that she had crossed paths with someone who saw the trail not as a passage of beauty, but as a hunting ground. Hikers who had encountered strange things in the Rockies began coming forward. A young couple described hearing footsteps shadowing them at night, though when they shone their flashlight, nothing was there. Another man claimed he had woken to find his tent partially unzipped, though none of his belongings were missing. A woman said she met a ragged stranger who asked unsettling questions about whether she was hiking alone. These accounts, dismissed as paranoia before, now felt like echoes of Emily's final days. Through it all, the SD card remained the most haunting artifact. Investigators confirmed that it had indeed been concealed in Emily's shoe, placed under the insole in a way that suggested intention. Whether Emily herself had hidden it or someone else had done so remained the central question. If Emily had hidden it, she must have known she was in danger and wanted the evidence protected. If someone else had hidden it, the motive was unclear. Why preserve the card rather than destroy it? Why let it resurface years later, unless it was meant to be found? The psychological toll on those closest to Emily deepened. Her mother withdrew further, refusing to watch the leaked video, refusing even to speak of the possibility her daughter had suffered. Anna, by contrast, immersed herself in every detail, as though unraveling the mystery. Could keep Emily alive in some way. She was strong, Anna repeated in interviews. She wasn't careless. If she was scared enough to record herself, we need to know why. We need to know who did this to her. By late summer, whispers of a task force began circulating. Federal agencies, state patrol, and local sheriffs were rumored to be pooling resources to search the Collegiate Peaks again, this time with drones, heat imaging, and cadaver dogs. Officials would not confirm it, but activity in the area suggested preparations were underway. For many, it felt like a final push, the last chance to find what remained of Emily before another winter erased the trail. Yet beneath the renewed effort, a deeper unease spread. The idea that someone could stalk hikers for years unseen had cracked the public's trust in wilderness safety. Outdoor forums buzzed with arguments. Some insisted the backcountry was still safe if approached wisely, while others vowed never to hike alone again. Outfitters saw sales drop. Tour guides faced cancellations. The Colorado Trail Conservancy received angry letters demanding closures. Emily's story, once a tragedy, was mutating into a cautionary legend. And somewhere in the Rockies, high among the jagged ridges and silent forests, the unanswered question lingered. If Emily had indeed captured her pursuer on that SD card, was he still out there, watching from the tree line, waiting for the next traveler who wandered too far from the path? The task force launched their coordinated search in September, just as the first hints of autumn touched the high country. Helicopters swept the ridges with thermal imaging cameras, drones hummed low over alpine valleys, and search teams pushed into areas no hiker would normally tread. For weeks, the mountains echoed with the sounds of engines, barking dogs, and the crackle of radios, an invasion of technology into a wilderness that had long resisted intrusion. Locals watched with wary eyes. Some believed answers would finally come. Others feared the mountains would keep their secrets, as they always had. On the 10th day, a team of cadaver dogs alerted in a narrow ravine deep in the Collegiate Peaks. The area was treacherous, littered with boulders and hidden crevices, the kind of place only a desperate or hunted person would venture. After hours of digging and careful extraction, searchers uncovered fragments of bone, scraps of fabric, and rusted metal buckles. DNA testing would later confirm the remains belonged to Emily Carter. The news traveled like wildfire, shattering the last sliver of hope her family had clung to. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Emily's skeletal remains showed no clear cause of death. Some bones bore signs of blunt force trauma, but whether from a fall or an attack could not be determined. The clothing fragments matched what she had last been seen wearing, but certain items were missing: her jacket, her trekking poles, her journal. Most disturbingly, her pack was found half a mile uphill from the ravine, hidden beneath a cairn of carefully stacked stones. Inside were survival supplies, maps, and a torn page from her notebook. On the page, written in rushed handwriting, were the words, "He's close. If I don't make it, look at the card." The revelation that Emily had anticipated her own and electrified the investigation. It suggested she had deliberately hidden the SD card, using her shoe as a desperate vault for evidence. She had known she might not survive, and she had chosen to leave a trail. Her final act had been one of resistance, a refusal to let her story vanish with her body. Yet the note also deepened the mystery. Who was he? Was it a single stalker? A stranger she encountered? Someone she knew? Without further evidence, the identity of Emily's pursuer remained a void. Public reaction was explosive. Vigils spread from Colorado to cities across the country. Strangers left hiking boots filled with flowers on courthouse steps, symbolic memorials for Emily and the other hikers who had vanished in the Rockies. Hashtags surged online, demanding justice, demanding answers. Some called for permanent closure of sections of the trail. Others argued that to close the wilderness was to surrender to fear, to let Emily's unknown killer win. Investigators pressed deeper into the ravine where Emily's remains were found. They uncovered evidence of an old hunting camp, rusted traps, fire pits, and the remnants of makeshift shelters. One shelter contained a faded tarp, beneath which lay a box of canned food, an axe, and a collection of weathered journals. Most were waterlogged and illegible, but fragments hinted at a solitary existence. One entry, though blurred, seemed to mention, "Watching the trail." Another listed dates, some of which coincided with known disappearances. The possibility that Emily had stumbled upon this hidden camp, and the person who maintained it, was now impossible to ignore. Yet despite the tantalizing clues, no living suspect emerged. If someone had once haunted the mountains, preying on the lost, they had vanished as thoroughly as Emily once had. The journals contained no names, no addresses, no photographs. They were artifacts of a ghost. For law enforcement, the lack of a tangible figure to arrest, question, or prosecute was maddening. For Emily's family, it was torture. Justice felt so close, yet utterly unreachable. Anna Carter, exhausted by years of searching, spoke at Emily's memorial service in October. Her voice cracked as she addressed the crowd gathered beneath the aspens. "My sister was brave. She loved these mountains, even when they turned against her. She left us a message because she wanted the truth to come out. We may never know his name, but we know this. She wasn't lost. She was taken, and we will not forget her." In the aftermath, Emily's story became legend. Writers dubbed her the Thru-Hiker ghost, a figure who walked the Colorado Trail in memory and warning. Documentaries speculated endlessly about her final days. Scholars of wilderness culture debated her case in classrooms. Some hikers left offerings at the point where her remains were found, stones stacked, photos pinned to trees, bracelets wrapped around branches. For many, the spot became both shrine and scar, a place where beauty and horror intertwined. But perhaps the most haunting legacy was the SD card itself. Preserved now in an evidence vault, its contents remained the clearest window into Emily's ordeal. The final video, replayed endlessly, was seared into the public imagination, her whisper, her wide eyes, the shadow in the darkness. Even without a conviction, the card had done its work. It had kept Emily's voice alive. It had ensured her story was not buried under snow and silence. Years later, as the case drifted into cold files, hikers on the Colorado Trail still spoke of her. Some claimed to feel her presence on lonely stretches of the path, as though she were still warning others to stay vigilant. A few even said they heard whispers on the wind, fragments of her final words. Whether superstition or grief, the legend of Emily Carter became inseparable from the trail itself. In the end, the mountains gave back what they had taken, but not the truth in full. Emily's remains told only part of the story, her SD card another. Together, they painted a picture of fear, courage, and a predator who remained faceless. The wilderness, vast and untamed, kept its final secret. And perhaps that was the cruelest answer of all, that in the heart of the Rockies, even with all our technology, there are still places where the line between human and shadow blurs, where a single hiker can vanish into silence, leaving only whispers, a torn note, and the faint glow of a camera in the dark.